Right then, so let's just have a quick review of the techniques, the problem solving techniques that you've looked at. We'll start with paired comparisons because you just watched a video on there and it talked about it's good for weighing options when things aren't clear, you've got differing criteria or you've got no hard data to work from. It talked about the steps. First, it's about listing them on the grid, lettering them, A, B, C and D. It's about comparing them, so it's comparing A against B, A against C, A against D, so you're not comparing them all together at the same time, which makes it easier to do the comparison. It's about marking the winner from each of those comparisons and then scoring it on how important they are, 1, 2 or 3. It's then about adding them up, and basically highest score gets you a winner. And it's just a way of, again, another tool to help you make that decision. It doesn't necessarily mean you've got to go with that winning one, but normally it will prioritize them and put them in order of which one's the best. We also looked at pros and cons, which was really just about brainstorming the advantages or disadvantages. Very, very simple. We then looked at weighted decision grids, where we're scoring them against each other using a weighting factor about what is the most important factor for us. We then looked at decision trees, which really is just about mapping out a route with all the possible choices that we've got, and doesn't, as we said, doesn't make a decision for you. Ultimately, with a decision tree, someone's still got to make that final decision. And then we looked at Pareto analysis, that 20 to 80%, so the 20% of things that have the 80% of impact. So it was about grouping them all together by their root cause and prioritizing on them, because you can't do them all, and it's about looking at the ones that can have the biggest impact. And as we said in our example, you may find that that affects other things as well, so you may only have to focus on that one. So that's 5 techniques that we've looked at for problem solving, and we'll just start to review what we do. So we've used one of those techniques. We may have investigated using 2 or 3 of them, but sometimes we'll have to escalate a problem. And why might that happen? Well, good problem solving techniques might have got to the real root cause, and we talked before about making sure that who is involved in the team, and we set out that are doing the problem solving, and we set out some key factors. We talked about skills, responsibility and authority. As we've discovered the root cause behind the problem, authority is a key, and it may not be in the area that we first thought. If we've done some real good analysis and broken it all down, we may find that the responsibility or the authority lays outside of our original thoughts, and in this case we may have to go back to somebody and escalate it. And where would we escalate it to? Well, we go back to whoever set the objective in the first place, not the person whose responsibility it now lies in, and then we would continue to monitor it, because we may still retain responsibility for seeing it through to its end cause. So really it's about authority and responsibility. It's where the problem is outside of what we were originally tasked to do. We shouldn't be stepping over into other people's authority, and we should always report it back to the person who gave us the objective in the first place, because the people in the other areas might not even be aware of what's going on. So just about finish this session. We'll just start recapping on what we've covered, and then we'll look at an activity and what to do next. Right then, so we'll just recap on what our aims and objectives were. We said our aim was to understand problem solving and decision making techniques. And through the session, we looked at explaining the importance of clearly understanding the nature, scope and impact of a problem. We talked about that at the beginning, the basis of understanding what we're going on about. We talked about the relationship between problem solving and decision making, and we looked at some different techniques for problem solving and decision making. So hopefully we've covered enough there for you to complete the activity, which we'll move on to now. So this is a reflective activity. I want you to start thinking about situations where you've been involved in problem solving and decision making. So identify the nature, the scope of the problem, etc., and then start to produce a reflective account with reference to one problem solving technique and one decision making technique. So you need to make sure that you focus the way you solve the problem around one of the techniques from each of the sections we've looked at, and write your report in that manner. So align it to particular technique, even if you thought you weren't doing that when you did it. And if there's some gaps, just sort of highlight those where the gaps have been and where things weren't completed around the full technique, because you may not have been aware of that technique when you were doing the problem solving. So that's that activity, and once you've completed that and uploaded it, you can move on to what to do next. So once you've completed the activity we've just discussed, you can start to have a look at the evidence list, the guidance that's given for this unit, because this is a combined knowledge and skills unit, and start to think of situations or problems that you've been involved in, and start to gather evidence of them if they've already happened. If you haven't got a good reference point like the one you just used in your activity, start thinking of them as they come up and as you get involved in them, and start thinking about gathering evidence that's in that list. Anything you're unsure of, discuss it with your assessor. So you haven't got to produce the evidence now. We'll come back to that nearer the end of the course, but start thinking about some ideas using the evidence list of where you might gather it and what sort of stuff you could use. You may already have a good scenario that you've been through. I don't know, the one you've used in your activity may be a genuine situation that you can produce evidence from because it's happened recently. You may be able to gather some stuff. So if you've got that idea, discuss it with your assessor, and then you can move on to the next unit.